They went out for a walk because the woods felt like a remedy. An ordinary decision, an afternoon with wind in the pines, a trail that promised nothing more sinister than fresh air. Sometimes the forest keeps you whole. Other times it returns only pieces. A shoe on a root, a jacket neatly folded where no hand could have placed it, footprints that end as if whoever made them simply stepped off the earth. These are not ghost stories told around a campfire. They are accounts of people who left the path and never came back, and what was found later refused to make sense. This is a countdown of 10 vanishings tied to trails, campsites, park roads, and wooded paths, cases that begin in a place meant for walking and end in a silence that refuses explanation. Some of these are direct, documented disappearances. Others are narrative adaptations inspired by first-person accounts. Where details have been adapted for storytelling, I will say so up front. Nothing here pretends to close a case. Every unresolved line is labeled as such, every theory framed as one possibility among many. The goal is to look closely at the evidence, or at what the forest left behind, and to listen to the people who are still listening for their missing ones. Case 10. The evening walk that never ended. They had just finished a late Thanksgiving dinner. The table was cleared, coffee was cooling, and a man stepped outside to walk off the heaviness of the meal. The yard edged into a stand of trees that led to a small trail. He told his family he'd be gone for 20 minutes. Later, they would describe the stillness that followed. A dog waiting at the door, a light on inside, the smell of dessert in the house. The minutes stretched into an hour. A neighbor called the police when the family began to worry. Search teams walked the rim of the woods with flashlights, the beam cutting through the low branches. Dogs sniffed every root and rock. The official file is a spare document of times and locations. Last seen walking toward the trees, last confirmed by the door camera, calls, the formal search. No one could prove he had gone back to the road, and there were no eyewitnesses saying they had seen him later. At the edge of the woods, volunteers found a cigarette butt partially hidden under leaves, old smoke on a newer night, and a pair of footprints that led in but did not come out. Investigators later treated the case like an assault that began as a casual walk. There were signs the scene had been disturbed in ways that suggested human hands: bent branches at waist height, a flattened patch of moss, a single button snagged on a low branch. Those are the kinds of details that hang in the mind. Small domestic things misplacing themselves in an environment that makes no promise of order. The county coroner's report would not confirm a cause of death. The missing man's file was closed only in form, not in intent.
His family kept searching, and the detective assigned to the case would tell interviewers years later that sometimes the woods swallowed a person without leaving the usual breadcrumb trail. This segment is an adaptation of a first-person and local account composite. Some specifics are dramatized for narrative clarity and require further verification before being treated as established fact. There is a peculiar cruelty to vanishings that begin at the edges of home, where the smell of coffee still hangs and the light is still on. They twist expectation. You expect the trail to take your foot forward and return it an hour later. When it does not, the ordinary becomes ominous. The family's phone records show no final calls. Neighbors remember cars, the sound of a voice drifting out the window and then stopping. The last shred of reported evidence was a single thumb-sized patch of mud on a shoe left on the porch, like a clue promising more and giving nothing. After this case, there were months of rumor in the town. A man seen near the highway, hikers mentioning an unfamiliar campsite downriver, a woman in a supermarket who swore she had seen someone who matched his description. None of these sightings confirmed anything. That kind of speculation is the mind's attempt to mend an unstitched seam. It comforts, but it rarely convinces. For the family, the ambiguity became a secondary suffering. They learned to live with not knowing where their father was, and with the endless small rituals that came to feel like searching. Driving past the trailhead in case someone recognized him, printing new flyers, spending cold mornings at county offices looking for anything official. If this kind of deep dive into unresolved disappearances is the kind of content you come for, consider subscribing. Your support keeps these stories in circulation, and it helps keep memory alive. Case 9. A toddler, a trail, and a pair of shoes. He was small enough to disappear behind a log. The day started like any other, a family outing to a local trail, a picnic near the water. Children ran ahead, adults laughed, parents tended to baby wipes and peanut butter sandwiches. At some point, one toddler ran faster than the adults could watch. He was last seen near a shallow ravine where two trails split.
The group searched in a radius at first, calling until their voices hoarse. They called for him in the voices that parents use, anxious, high-pitched, and then called the police. This is a direct account drawn from the missing person record for Jared Adato. The facts we have are those that were recorded. A toddler went missing during a family outing. Search teams scoured the area. The initial hours were frantic. Volunteers combed the underbrush, helicopters scanned the treetops, and cadaver dogs worked the line of brush and riverbank.
Each passing hour narrowed the options in the way that only time does. The child's shoes might have been kicked off during a tumble. He could have followed an animal track. He could have found a burrow and crawled inside. What was found later is what sealed the case in the public mind. A child's shoe, clean, relatively intact, was discovered several hundred yards uphill from where the family searched. It sat on a mossy rock as if someone had placed it there with care. The shoe did not look like something that had been banged against roots and dragged through dirt. It looked like a small artifact set down. Investigators cataloged the shoe, photographed it, and noted the curious lack of other debris around it. There were no other shoes nearby, no blood patterns, no clothing tethers, just that single solitary shoe. Experts reviewed the topography. Water flows steeply through that ravine. It would be unlikely for the current to carry an object uphill and set it on a rock. Searchers wondered whether the shoe had been planted, deliberately repositioned by an unknown hand, or whether it was the result of some strange natural force. Animals sometimes move small objects. Scavengers can carry things strange distances. Yet this shoe's pristine condition and placement resisted tidy explanations. Families of the missing often face a second cruelty that is not written in police reports, the way public interest shrinks when there is no neat narrative. For weeks there were volunteers, lights, and a sense of community urgency. Then months passed and the search plates cooled. The child's parents remained vocal, pleading for leads, showing photos on social media, and organizing small search parties. The shoe continued to hover in the imaginations of everyone involved, a silent accusation that something had not been seen, a proof of absence rather than of presence. Case 8. The campsite at the edge of a county road. The tent's zipper was zipped from the outside. A camp chair remained upright as if someone had just stood. A cooler hummed coyly. If you were a passerby on the two-lane county road, you would have seen nothing unusual. 2 trucks parked at a pullout, an empty campsite with a plate of half-eaten food. But to friends of the missing and to the ranger who later pieced together the timeline, that empty campsite was the center of a riddle. This segment is derived from an account in the original material and is presented here as a narrative adaptation of a first-person recollection. Some dialogue and connective tissue have been dramatized for clarity. The group had pulled off the road to camp for the night after a long day of hiking. There were stories around the fire about strange nights and road trip music. Someone went to sleep with a jacket over their shoulders. In the morning, one person failed to wake. The tent's zipper was closed as it had been the night before. There was no sign of forced entry. There were no drag marks in the dirt. The missing person's truck was still there. Their boots were neatly tucked inside the tent. Only one thing was out of place: a small, thumb-sized piece of cloth, one that matched a shirt the missing person owned, stuck in the snap of the cooler. Searchers worked the pullout and the immediate tree line, then radiated outward. Satellite phones allowed a call to a county ranger who had seen a surge in camper traffic that weekend. The ranger, upon arrival, felt the way any experienced woodsman does when the forest refuses to explain. The air tasted thin and distant. He noticed subtle things that do not make it into reports. The tents inside faintly smelled of perfume that did not belong to anyone registered as a camper. An ashtray contained cigarette butts that did not match the group's usual brand. Small inconsistencies add up like stitches in a seam, each one suggesting someone else had been there. Days later, campers on an adjacent ridge found evidence that complicated the neatness of the campsite mystery. A footprint partially obscured by fallen pine needles, shoe prints that trailed up a slope and simply stopped at a rock ledge. The footprint's size did not match the missing person's shoe. Nearby, a backpack, zipped shut and clean on the outside, was discovered leaning against a tree. It was empty, but the interior lining had a faint smear of an unidentifiable stain. Forensic teams declined to make definitive statements, noting only that nothing conclusively tied those items to a perpetrator or to a natural explanation. The haunting quality of this case comes not from violence described in reports, but from the inability to decide between possible narratives. Was the person lured? Did they leave on their own? Did an opportunistic stranger take advantage of a sleeping campsite? The family said they could not accept the silence. Friends mounted regular hikes to the area, calling out names, leaving offerings of small things, trail mix, notes wrapped in plastic, on branches. The woods absorbed them all without comment. Case 7. The hitchhiker thumbs up.
On a quiet stretch of rural road, where the asphalt is flanked by dense trees, a driver pulled over to help someone who appeared to be hitchhiking with a thumbs up and a weather-smooth duffel. The driver moved slowly. Rural roads are often lifelines for travelers, and the hitchhiker climbed into the passenger seat. They exchanged a few words, the kind of small talk that fills gaps. A destination, a mutual complaint about cold coffee, a nod at the weather. The two separated at a turn where the road split. This is drawn from a vignette that exists in the source material. The core is adopted here into a hiking-adjacent scenario and presented as a narrative adaptation. Weeks later, a series of disappearances began in locations not much more than hours apart. A jogger on a morning path, a camper who had stepped away from a shared fire, a man who left a rest stop to stretch his legs and never returned.
Some of the victims' friends mentioned a common detail: someone seen hitchhiking on the same stretch of road. One witness remembered the same thumbs-up gesture and a particular laugh. Another remembered a car with a dent on the quarter panel. It is important to say that nothing in the police files directly linked the driver who picked up a hitchhiker to the disappearances. The commonalities, as presented by local witnesses, are suggestive but not conclusive. The woman who later became known in local recountings as Nikki told her story in a quiet voice. She had picked up a man, and while grateful he had appeared harmless, later she received a call that unsettled the arrangement. He phoned her to thank her, but there was something in the way he described the route that didn't add up. He knew things she had not told him about. The story ends with a scream the recorded device captured on a neighbor's security camera, but that is where the public record thins. Police logs note anonymous tips after the initial disappearances, a scrawled note found at a payphone, and a man who refused to go on camera to say what he knew. It is easy to draw a line from the hitchhiker to the disappearances, and harder to prove any single link. The region's transient population complicates theories. Seasonal workers, travelers cutting across the country, and local teenagers looking for work all pass through. The one detail that all families shared, quietly and with a look toward the ground, was a sense that someone else had been traveling these roads at night with intent. Case 6. The park ranger who was almost taken. Not every story in these woods ends in disappearance. Some end in a near miss, and those close calls matter because they expose how precarious an ordinary day can become. A park ranger was walking a routine perimeter after dark when a teenager, lost and shaking, stumbled into his path. The ranger, attentive to the rhythms of the place, radioed for backup. That call saved the teenager's life. On the same stretch of trail, however, were markers of other nights: a tent left pitched with no occupants, a used lighter with a name etched in it, a small carving on a tree wiped by rain but still legible under lamplight. This account pulls from a rescue story in the source material and is presented as a direct adaptation of those recollections. Details about the ranger and the teenager are drawn from aggregated reports and reflected here with respect. What makes the ranger's tale relevant to a series about vanishings is the thinness of the boundary between rescue and loss. The ranger believed something less ordinary was happening on his patch of trail. People were disappearing from campsites, lone hikers reported being watched, and missing person posters accumulated like autumn leaves on telephone poles. He began to catalog anomalies: tents zipped from the outside, sleeping bags left neatly folded, a toothbrush still in its case.
On one occasion, he found a scarf hung over a branch, as if marking a path. On another, he discovered a child's toy tucked into the crook of a rock face. The ranger's vigilance led to a discovery that was small but pointed. Along a seldom-used side trail, he found a footprint pattern that did not belong. Several sets of boot prints, overlapped and weathered, making it difficult to tell their chronology. In a depression nearby, a thin plastic bag contained items that the ranger recognized from several missing person reports: a particular brand of candy wrapper, a certain style of disposal razor. None of it was enough for a criminal affidavit, but for the ranger, the pattern was undeniable. Someone had been moving through campsites and leaving traces like breadcrumbs for no one to follow. He began to accompany search teams, sharing notes and creating a map of where small anomalies clustered. Near misses like this one leave a flavor on memory, what might have been. The ranger told colleagues that the difference between finding someone in time and not finding them often comes down to minutes and ordinary attentiveness. He kept a log, and that log would become crucial in later narratives, not because it solved cases, but because it proved that someone had been watching and that sometimes, against the odds, someone noticed in time. A moment between cases. The woods have no agenda. To the forest, a human is a momentary disturbance, a footprint that will be filled with rain, a sound that will blur into wind. That indifference breeds a particular kind of dread. People speak of the forest as if it were a living thing with intent, but the real terror here is simpler. Places that do not care about us are places where small complications metastasize into mysteries. A missing item can become a monument, A boot print can be a map that refuses to be read. We have moved through 5 stories so far, some documented, some adapted from witness accounts, and each shares a pattern. An ordinary beginning, a moment of separation from the known, and a later discovery that fragments rather than explains. There are footprints that stop mid-slope, clothing found clean where it could not have been, single shoes placed as if set down. No single common denominator emerges. Human predation appears in some cases, accidents explain others, but more often than not, what is left is an accumulation of small, unanswerable things. Between these segments, people press their palms to trees and call names into the trunks, not because they think the wood can reply, but because speaking at the place where the absence occurred feels like an action worth caking. Families organize searches and then organize their lives around the absence. Communities gather, then slowly disband. The forest waits. Up ahead are 5 more stories. Some are well-documented disappearances, others are composites shaped from local accounts. Each will be introduced with a clear note if it is an adaptation.
These next stories will delve into betrayals that began at church potlucks, the silhouette seen in a window that turned a house into a crime scene, and an object, only one object, found years after a person went missing that inverted what everyone thought they knew. For now, the search continues in the language of small details, the pattern of a shoe tread, the scent of cigarette smoke, the way the moon hits a ridge. The woods keep their secrets, but they also keep their traces. We just have to learn to read them.
Witnesses in town later said they had seen a tall man in a sweatshirt near the campground's lone diner that evening, someone who left the town in a car with a dented bumper. What haunts people in this case is not a single monstrous act clearly laid out. It's the intimacy of the evidence. An item of clothing placed as if someone had paused to fold it, a hair caught on a zipper like a hand reaching through fabric. Families ask why the jacket looked so deliberately set, why the footprint stopped abruptly at a shelf of rock where no path continued. Was the friend taken by someone who wanted to leave a message, or was the jacket an attempt to mislead? Did the silhouette in the window belong to a lost hiker or to someone watching for easy targets? None of these questions found answers in an investigation that ran for months and then slowed when leads fizzled. The friends were left with ritual grief, revisiting the ridge, leaving candles where the jacket had been found, calling into the trees to see if human voices would answer one another. Community members posted warnings on social media, and for a while strangers showed up, flashlights in hand, to walk the paths with them. Eventually, the town settled into a resigned vigilance, an effort to notice what had once been ignored. Case 4. The Invitation Past the Old Church Path. This segment is an adaptation inspired by accounts from community testimony. Names and certain specifics have been changed for dramatization and require verification. Church socials often double as de facto networks in small towns. People swap casseroles and trail tips at the same potluck, and the attendance sheet becomes an informal directory. In one such place, a man known for organizing weekend hikes began offering rides and invitations to younger members to come out on day trips. He brought knowledge of trails and a calm manner. His volunteers trusted him. For a time, those who went with him came back with stories of clear views and a leader who knew the best place to watch the sunset. Then a teenager vanished after a group walk on an overgrown path behind the church, a route the leader had recommended as a shortcut. He had been last seen answering a call behind a stand of birches and promising he'd be right back. The group continued along the main track. Only when the sun dipped and he did not rejoin them did they realize he was gone. They searched in a panic, calling his name until their throats were raw and their battery packs died. The investigation turned in two directions: absence of environmental clues and an unraveling of small inconsistencies around the leader. Multiple people who had previously walked with him reported finding small personal items slightly out of place in their tents or cars afterward: an extra flashlight left on a picnic table, a scarf folded and set where it couldn't have fallen naturally. One woman recounted feeling pressured to accept a ride home late at night when her phone had no signal. She declined and later described the man's voice as too assuring. Detectives interviewed the leader extensively. He offered a steady alibi and, on paper, appeared cooperative. The church, meanwhile, set up a hotline and encouraged members to share any information. Parents pored over the leader's social media, noting photos of trails and maps, nothing more. Rumors blossomed into accusations in community threats. The church's directory, once a comforting resource, became cold print that people examined for patterns. Months later, hikers found a single glove along an old fence line, miles from the usual trail, and oddly clean. It was cataloged and photographed, then filed as an item of interest. Forensic teams were inconclusive. There were no DNA matches tied to the missing teen. The leader's access to vehicles and knowledge of remote places remained a point of suspicion in the community, but without proof, it became the kind of accusation that settles into rumor rather than court records. What makes this story linger is the betrayal it suggests, the collapse of trust when someone from within an intimate circle becomes a possible suspect. That suspicion fractures families and churches alike. It turns normal community functions into suspect rituals. For the parents of the missing teenager, the hardest thing was not only the absence of their child, but the slow erasure of safety in familiar spaces. They stopped attending evening meetings, stopped trusting ride offers, and began to measure every social invitation by a calculus of risk. This case remains unresolved. Investigators noted the leader's inconsistent statements, but could not build enough evidence to bring charges. Members of the congregation still whisper about who might have known more and what small acts of conviviality masked. The church installed a check-in system for off-site hikes, and the town, painfully, adopted new habits of warning and accompaniment that it had not needed before. A short reflection. Trust gets brittle in the wake of disappearance. The places where people used to believe each other, potlucks, trailheads, diner counters, acquire a new hyper-awareness.
In the wilderness, where the map's white space begins, human networks were once a buffer against the terrain's indifference. When those networks strain, the buffer thins, and the forest's silence feels louder. Case 3. The Jacket Found Upriver. This segment is an adaptation labeled Indefinito. Elements are drawn from multiple accounts and combined into a composite narrative for exploration rather than statement of fact. He had been an ordinary day hiker, the sort of person who planned a circular route and set a reasonable pace. He left his car at dawn and followed a service road into a stretch of river valley where two smaller streams met. Weathered trail markers directed him deeper into the trees.
An hour into the hike, he was already off the main crest, picking wildflowers and taking small photos for his partner. 3 days later, an angler walking the upriver rocks found a jacket hung over a snag of branches above a rivulet, clean, buttoned, and dry. The jacket's color was a sober green. Its lining bore a manufacturer's tag the hiker's sister would later recognize from photos. There was no sign of a struggle nearby. No footprints marked the muddy banks. The jacket's sleeves were empty. When the angler called it in, the ranger who responded noted the oddity of the placement. Someone had taken care to position the garment above the waterline, not simply tossed it aside. Cameras in town recorded search teams lugging out volunteers who combed the banks, scanning undercut roots and the tangle of willow. Dogs worked the perimeter, but the scent ends where the river bends and the forest folds into thicker growth. The initial intuition that a slip and a fall had taken the hiker into the water grew complicated the more the investigators looked. If he had fallen, why would the jacket be dry and folded as if someone had left it there? Forensic possibilities were discussed privately among detectives. Animals can drag items, scavengers can carry objects to odd locations, and, less comfortably, people can stage scenes. The river's current made certain kinds of movement improbable. The jacket's positioning suggested human hands. Yet there was no trace of a body, no camera tile that caught a glimpse of an unknown car on the pullout. For months the river valley yielded only hints: a shoelace snagged inches from the water, a carabiner with no rope, a plastic wrapper that matched a brand sold near the town's highway. The family refused to accept that the jacket's discovery was closure. If anything, it sharpened everything that felt blurry. They started a grassroots search, recruiting kayakers and volunteer climbers to chart the river's lesser paths. They gathered maps and compared notes with the angler who had found the jacket, retracing his steps to understand why he had seen that garment and not others. The angler said he had not noticed anything else: no camps, no discarded food, no sign of a human camp near that snag. This case holds a specific kind of horror, something deliberate about a simple act. A jacket placed on a branch is not a scream. It is a small and careful misdirection. It insists on being interpreted but denies certainty. Families carry photographs of the jacket, worn in frames, and every so often someone will send a note to the family. "I drove that road last week. I thought of you." People who have loved someone vanish learn that the world will keep producing reminders that both comfort and torment, the possibility of a sign, and the inevitability of not knowing why it was placed there. Case 2. The Crowd That Looked Away. This segment adapts urban vignettes into a wilderness-adjacent narrative to examine the social side of disappearance. It is an adaptation and contains dramatized elements. A small regional mall sits at the edge of town, its parking lot a crossroads of commuters, teenagers, and weekend travelers. One evening, 2 decades ago, a fight broke out between shoppers near a sporting goods store where a map rack sold regional trail guides. Someone fell, someone bled. The response was strange. Rather than jump in to help immediately, some bystanders filmed with phones, some took pictures, some walked on. The footage later became a parable. People had chosen spectacle over rescue. The incident traveled through local conversation and settled into the town's folklore as a caution about indifference. Why does that matter in a series about hikers vanishing? Because disappearance is not only a matter of the trees and the terrain, it is a social event. When a person leaves a trail, the speed and quality of human response shape outcomes. The mall story parallels what happens when hikers call for help on unfamiliar dirt. Sometimes strangers step forward, and sometimes they step back. There are nights when a handful of people see someone stranded at a trailhead and do nothing. There are times when a passerby's phone becomes a recorder instead of a hotline. A pattern emerges in several of the cases we've looked at: a delay before the alarm sounded, ambiguous witness reports, a handful of people who later recall seeing something they did not report immediately. In one case, a hiker waved to passing cars from a shoulder of a county road as night fell. Drivers slowed but did not stop. By the time someone finally called the patrol, the hiker was gone.
The delay between a person being noticed and a search being launched is often measured not only in minutes, but in the psychology of the crowd. Someone assumes a joke, someone else assumes it's none of their business, and everyone deferred responsibility until it was too late. This observation is not an accusation of cowardice, but a plea for communal responsibility. The wilderness expects individual preparedness, but the social world around the trailhead, drivers, cafe owners, gas station attendants, forms a fragile lattice that either enables a quick response or permits a lapse. In towns where disappearances cluster, people sometimes create watch lists and volunteer rosters. In others, a quiet acceptance builds that if something happens, someone else will handle it. Case 1. The forest keeps its scars. Final case. This final entry is a composite investigative synthesis that draws on documented cases and adapted accounts. Its purpose is to compare patterns rather than to assert new factual claims. The first 9 stories share an anatomy. Each begins with mundane movement: a step to the edge of the yard, a detour off a trail, a cigarette outside a tent, a hand reaching for a map.
Each progresses into a zone where ordinary assumptions break down. Roads dissolve into gravel, daylight narrows, phone service drops, and each leaves behind evidence that resists a single explanation: a jacket folded over a branch, a shoe set upon a mossy stone, a silhouette in a window, a glove hung from a wire. When investigators look across such cases, several motifs recur. One is the interruption of expectation. Trails marked for easy passage end in dense thickets. Small objects appear where gravity and river currents would not normally carry them. Another is predatory opportunity. The presence of transient individuals, drivers passing through, hitchhikers, people camping at pullouts, creates an environment where someone with ill intent can blend in. A third is the social pause. For whatever reason, fear, skepticism, obligation, witnesses sometimes delay reporting, which narrows the window for rescue. None of these motifs provides a tidy answer. They are instead a framework for asking better questions. If a shoe is found uphill of a search area, what topographical processes could explain it? If a jacket is neatly placed above a river, who benefits from staging such an item? When footprints stop on a ledge, is that the sign of a climb completed or a final step into concealment? Each question invites both a practical approach and a humane one. Practically, trailheads should have clearer check-in systems. Rangers need better staffing and cross-jurisdiction communication. Hikers should carry location beacons and tell someone their route. These are the safety notes that fill the last pages of an investigation, but are often the ones that save lives in the present. Humanely, families and communities need mechanisms to keep searching in ways that do not destroy them. Many of the relatives we met in these stories organize searches not only to find their missing, but to keep the memory present in a world inclined to forget. Small rituals, leaving a note at a trailhead, a candle where a jacket was found, a group walk on anniversaries, are ways to live with ambiguity without surrendering to it. In the end, the forest's indifference is not malevolent, it is impartial. That fact does not make the loss less painful. If anything, it compounds it. Grief must exist alongside the knowledge that the environment will not hold a memory the way people do. So we hold it for them. We post flyers, we upload photos, we keep the list of missing hikers active in social feeds. We call attention to strange footprints, and we do not let a single jacket be flattened into a single unexplained item. We keep noticing. Closing montage and final thought. Across these 10 cases, some documented, some adapted, there is no single villain, no uniform solution. There are predatory humans in some stories, accidents in others, and in too many an absence that will not be resolved.
What ties them is not a neat cause, but a shared human cost. The families left to answer questions that have no final boarding pass. The friends who measure anniversaries in trailhead visits. The rangers who compile lists of anomalies and sleep poorly because they imagine the footsteps they missed. If you take anything from these accounts, take 2 things. First, prepare. Tell someone your route, carry a location device, know where you are going, and do not assume help will always be near. Second, notice. If you see something, an abandoned jacket on a branch, a lone shoe on a rock, someone standing too still by a vein of asphalt, report it. The difference between a story that ends in a missing person flyer and a story that ends with a person back at a table with coffee can be a single call to the dispatch desk. This series included adaptations of first-person recollections and composite narratives intended to explore patterns found in the field. Segments labeled as adaptations condensed or combined elements for clarity. They are not substitutes for primary sources. Please check the description for production notes, links to source material, and a list of resources for families affected by missing persons. If these stories linger with you, consider subscribing and checking the video description for further reading and resources to support missing person organizations. Memory is a communal act. The small effort of staying informed helps keep these people from vanishing entirely from our shared attention. They went into the trees for reasons as mundane as fresh air and as private as a need to step away. What came back, in 10 different ways, were objects and traces that refused to resolve. The woods did not form an answer. The woods offered fragments. It is up to those left behind, and to those who notice, to gather those fragments, to ask the questions, and to keep searching until the seams between trail and forest are, however imperfectly, a little safer for the next person who steps off the path. See the description for sources, production notes, and links to support organizations for missing persons.